waivers provided for under the governor's executive order in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency. During the public health emergency, City Hall is closed to the public. The agenda states the public may view the meeting that is being live streamed online and on ETV Channel 27 and provide comment by submitting an online comment form, which will then be read into the record by staff. The comment form can be accessed by going to our main City of Emeryville website at emeryville.org and clicking on Council Agendas and Videos. Once there, you will see a link entitled Submit an Online Speaker Card. The public also has the option of participating in tonight's meeting via Zoom and may provide public comment during the meeting using the raise your hand feature visible on your screen, or if you're calling in, press *9 to be recognized. The Zoom call-in information was provided on the posted agenda, as well as e-notification and on social media. And now I'll turn to the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders.
Here.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Pats.
Here.
Vice Mayor Donahue.
Here.
And Mayor Martinez.
Here. And next up, we have approval of the final agenda. I would entertain a motion in a second.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Member Medina, a second from Vice Mayor Donahue. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember Pats.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
And Mayor Martinez.
Aye. Are there any ex parte communications on this item? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to public comment. Now is the time for the public comment portion of this meeting. Anyone who wishes to make comments related to items not on the agenda or the consent agenda should have submitted your online speaker card by now. 3 minutes will be allowed for the city clerk to read your comments into the record. If you're participating in tonight's meeting via Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature visible on your screen, or if you're calling in, press *9. At this time, I will ask the city clerk whether any comments have been received via the online comment card.
There are no comments at this time.
Okay, and I'm checking the attendees list. And I'll remind attendees, you can use the raise hand feature to be recognized, or *9 if you're calling in. And I don't see any hands raised at this time, so I will go ahead and close public comment and move us to our study session. And this is a study session to review issues and options paper discussing requirements and opportunities to streamline the development review process for multifamily and mixed-use residential projects requiring ministerial approval to comply with state law by making targeted changes to the city's planning regulations. So take it away.
All right, I believe Navarre is going to open the item.
Great, welcome, Navarre.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Tonight, Jane Iceberg of Lexington Planning and Jane Lynn of Urban Field Studios will be presenting an objective standards, which you just described. Thank you. And recent state laws limit the city's ability to require certain multifamily and mixed-use residential development proposals to comply. Oh, my notes just appeared. Anyway, they require certain multifamily mixed-use residential development proposals to comply with subjective standards, regulations, and criteria. So instead, state laws allow these projects to undergo streamlined review, and that is for objective standards that can be measured, such as setbacks, height, or density, or answered with yes or no questions. In December of 2019, the city was awarded an SB2 planning grant from the State Department of Housing and Community Development for preparation of such objective standards. And that needs to be used before the end of 2022. In June of 2020, the city issued a request for proposals, resulting in the selection of Lexington Planning as the consultant for the project. Staff has been working with the consultant to review current documents and conduct stakeholder meetings and develop the issues and options paper that is before you tonight. At the April 22nd Planning Commission meeting, a study session was held to review the same issues and options paper that you were looking at tonight. And tonight's presentation has been modified slightly from the Planning Commission presentation to make it more concise. At the April 22nd meeting, the commissioners expressed appreciation for the detailed review and concern that their limited time to review the topic was not sufficient to provide direction. So it was suggested that a special meeting focus solely on the topic of objective standards be held. So as part of the council's feedback tonight, staff would like to know if the council would like to hold a special joint meeting with the Planning Commission to further discuss objective standards. And with that, I would like to now introduce Jean Iceberg and Jane Lynn, who will make the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Navarre. Good evening, Mayor Martinez. Members of the council. I'm Jean Iceberg with Lexington Planning. I'm going to give the first half of this presentation and then pass it on to my associate, Jane Lynn, with Urban Field Studio. So the next slide shows our agenda for tonight. First, I'm going to provide an overview of the Objective Standards Project, talk about its relationship to state law. Jane is going to talk about the local regulatory context and the process of transforming subjective guidelines into objective design criteria, and then we will have a discussion. So the next slide is my next topic, project overview. After that, we have the following slide is just a summary of the project. This is funded by Senate Bill 2, which provides grants to achieve one or more things: streamlining housing approvals, facilitating housing affordability, and/or accelerating housing production. Our focus is on the first bullet, streamlining housing approvals. And as such, we are looking to develop objective standards to transform the existing subjective guidelines into objective standards so that the city can continue to enforce them to facilitate high quality housing and related public improvements. We're looking to simplify and clarify standards across a number of policy documents, such as the district level plans, as well as the general plan and design guidelines. And then lastly, all of this is looking to comply with recent changes in state law, which, as Navarre indicated, limits the ability of the city to use subjective guidelines when reviewing certain types of housing projects. The next slide talks about where these standards may apply. And so our applicability is really focused on multifamily residential and residential mixed use. And so in that way, we will be looking at ground floor retail and commercial guidelines. We will not be looking at 100% commercial projects. The next slide is our timeline. To date, we've been, over the fall and winter, reviewing the city's current adopted policies. We met with stakeholders, both architects and project applicants who have done a number of projects in the city, as well as meeting with city staff to understand the current regulations, the current process, and how those are working. That resulted in the issues and options paper in front of you tonight. And this is our first study session with the council. We've had one other study session, as Navarre indicated, with the Planning Commission. And after we develop draft standards, we'll be coming back to have additional study sessions in addition to potentially the joint meeting that Navarre mentioned. And then finally, we'll be preparing the draft ordinance for adoption in the fall. So what are these objective standards? This is the definition under state law. They are uniformly verifiable standards, knowable by the applicant prior to submittal. And so if we think about development standards, things like front setbacks, like building height or FAR, those are all objective standards versus more subjective criteria, which could be things like compatibility with neighborhood character and context, which are, of course, more subjective in nature and depend on your perspective. So the next slide is summarizing our key issues, and this is really the heart of the issues and options paper in your packet. And so the key issues are that these changes in state law allow certain types of projects that meet objective standards to undergo streamlined review. However, many of the city's design regulations are subjective, and so for certain types of multifamily and mixed-use projects undergoing streamlined review, those subjective design criteria cannot be held to either reduce the density, limit the project in terms of its feasibility, or otherwise modify the project. Related to that, the making of subjective findings, the review of projects against those subjective guidelines is, as a result, unnecessary and burdensome. And so therefore, the city is considering developing objective standards that retain the concepts and design visions of these design guidelines, but are written as objective standards and therefore can be enforced for those streamlined projects. And so the box at right shows the types of regulations that currently the city has, and Jane will go into in a little bit more depth. So our next section is on the state and local regulatory context. So starting on the next slide with the state housing laws. I think the council is familiar with many of these. I'll just summarize. The Housing Accountability Act, which has been on the books for many decades now, essentially states that projects that meet the definition as a housing development project, that meet objective standards, these types of projects are limited in terms of the city's ability to deny them, make them infeasible, or reduce their density unless the city can make specific findings that the project would have an adverse impact on public health and safety. The second key state law is more recent, Senate Bill 35, which allows streamlining for certain types of projects that meet affordability criteria. Currently in Emeryville, that means projects need to be 50% below market rate. And such projects can undergo streamlined review, meaning ministerial approval, no CEQA analysis required. And so those types of projects do not necessarily go through and are not necessarily reviewed by the Planning Commission or Council, except potentially for advisory design comments. And then lastly, recently the state enacted Senate Bill 330, which modified a number of sections of state law. Most notably for us, it prohibits jurisdictions from imposing subjective design standards established after January of last year, limits downzoning such that if the city were to make changes to a zoning district that reduce the density or reduce the yield in that district, another district somewhere else in the city would need to be upzoned to ensure that there was no net loss. It applies a 5-meeting limit to certain types of projects, meaning that planning commission, council, other bodies that may review would be limited to 5 meetings for certain types of projects. And then lastly, identifies demolition and replacement requirements for projects that are proposing to remove existing dwelling units from a site. So the next slide explains what the relationship is across all of those state laws. They pertain to housing development projects. And so those are defined as projects with residential units only, mixed-use developments with at least 2/3 residential square footage, and transitional housing or supportive housing projects. The next slide begins a series of slides about how the city's current process works in terms of the review process and its relationship to generating affordable housing. So this first slide shows the standard process. The project comes in, it meets the base development standard. It's subject to the inclusionary housing requirement, a 12% requirement on site or fee in lieu, on site in lieu. And then the next slide shows your local density bonus ordinance. So a project that wants or needs additional bonus height, density, or FAR is going to provide more inclusionary housing than the existing law, so at least 12.5%, as well as other community benefits. The next slide shows a scenario where a project could come in and propose a density bonus project under state law. And in this case, they would be providing at least that 12% BMR requirement to meet the city's ordinance, potentially could provide more under state law. The advantage under state law is that there's also this opportunity for waivers and concessions from existing requirements. And so the local density bonus ordinance that the city has on the books does not allow for those waivers or concessions. And then lastly, on the next slide, we have the SB 35 scenario, which is typically paired with state density bonus law. So in that case, a project, the way things are in Emeryville right now, would be subject to that 50% threshold for BMR housing. If combined with state density bonus law, a project could request waivers and concessions from certain physical standards or concessions for issues that affect financial feasibility. But all of these projects, these state density bonus and SB 35 projects, have to meet objective standards. So our next slide shows the planning application paths for these different types of projects. So if we start on the bottom row, the SB 35 process is the most simple. An SB 35 project comes in, city staff reviews it for compliance with state law and for compliance with the city's objective standards, and that's it. All other projects on the top row City staff is the first line. They review the project for objective standards, potentially for compliance with the city's citywide design guidelines. And then for non-Housing Accountability Act projects, so the white boxes with blue text, the Planning Commission reviews that project based on both objective standards and the subjective design guidelines or other design criteria. And then that project may go to City Council if appealed, or if the project includes a demolition. The next series of boxes in the dark blue below that, the Housing Accountability Act projects, those projects are reviewed based on objective standards per state law. Additionally, the way it is now, the city also reviews those projects using the design guidelines, other subjective criteria. But as mentioned, those criteria, the subjective criteria, cannot be used to deny the project, make it infeasible, or reduce its density. So the next slide shows an example. I think you're all probably remember this one well, that just recently came in and was approved, 3600 Sam Hobble Avenue, the city's first SB 35 project. And so in this case, the Planning Commission and City Council did have an opportunity to review this project. Those comments provided by the Planning Commission and Council beyond the review of objective standards are essentially advisory design comments that the applicant then can listen to and voluntarily implement as part of their project. But in general, SB 35 projects do not always go to review bodies, and any changes to the project to respond to decision maker comments are voluntary if they're related to subjective standards. The next slide shows another proposed SB 35 project in Emeryville. A study session was held with the Planning Commission just most recently in March. And so this is just to demonstrate that these projects are starting to bubble up more and more, both in Emeryville and in communities throughout the East Bay and in California. So I'm going to pass along the slideshow to Jane Lynn from Urban Field Studio, who will talk about the next series.
Thanks, Jeannie. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to go over some of the local regulations and procedures. I'm sure you're all quite familiar with them, but we're hoping that this structure will help us understand them a little bit better. Just at the outset, we'd like to say that all the regulations and procedures that we've reviewed so far seem to be a very successful and working set, and that, generally they really result in good projects. So there's a lot of good to keep here. And just to explain this triangular diagram at the top, we really have broader to more specific at the bottom levels of regulations and procedures, and we'll walk through each. So at the top, next slide please, is the goals and policies in the general plan. And this, of course, was adopted in 2009, amended most recently in 2019, and articulates a vision for the city that focuses on broad principles such as quality of life and community character. And many of these plans' policies are aspirational and subjective. As a result, they're not always applicable to individual development projects like an SB 35 project that is only required to meet objective standards. However, the general plan guides growth and development in the city, including objective density, height, and use standards, which are also part of zoning, which we'll talk about in just a second. So next layer is the design guidelines. And in Emeryville, there are citywide design guidelines that apply to all new projects. And they're the primary source for what designers use and reference when they're beginning a project. The city prepared these in, following the general plan and in coordination with planning regulations. And so they're consistent. That is not the only place to find design guidelines. However, on the next slide, you'll see that there's district plans that are also in effect that address both goals and policies and guidelines. There are 6 district level plans which regulate development projects in special districts. And these were written in a range of times between 1990 and 2012, and some precede the general plan and zoning update, but many of them were really, the changes in those plans were largely completed after they were adopted. So there was the question of what we would do with these. They're somewhat consistent. They have district level specificity, but we really recommend that they're left as they are and that we would draw from them going forward. So on the next slide, this is the most defined and objective of all the regulations and procedures. Title IX, also known as the zoning ordinance. These objective standards regulate uses, development standards like density and height and parking and design standards that can be quantified. The city undertook a comprehensive zoning update following the adoption of the general plan, and so these are all aligned. So there are some subjective design guidelines out there. On the next slide, or in the next section, we'll really talk about how to make certain design guidelines into more objective design criteria. So what we've done on this table, we've used this table to summarize the regulations and procedures by whether they're generally objective or subjective. And as we noted with the triangular, planning regulations are in Title IX are generally objective standards that apply to all development projects, regardless of their size, use, or location. However, design guidelines and regulations in district level plans are more subjective. So in this case, or for example, regulations can call out for neighborhood and district identity and the design of buildings which are aspirational, but they're not measured and therefore cannot be enforced for housing development projects that are only required to meet objective standards. On the next slide, what we see is that we have always used both, and it's possible to keep both for pretty much the majority of projects, except for the ones that are only required to follow objective standards. So they're still useful, they're really important. And what we need to do is take some of these fuzzier, that's why with the cloud symbol, the guidelines that establish the design intent, subjective guidelines, and transform them into design standards that have an objective requirement and define a threshold. There are a wide variety of topics that regulations address, and the city could try to transform all these guidelines into standards, but that would be really challenging to complete, and we're not recommending this. And it also, we want to acknowledge that in some cases, as you take a guideline and make them into a standard, that they can be quite prescriptive and could result in a more singular style or massing. So that is something else that we're definitely aware of and looking to avoid. So how do you change these? On the next slide, there's some suggestions on ways to transform subjective regulations. So the first is simple numeric transformation. So that is adding a number, adding the measurement or dimension or any kind of number to make that subjective standard objective. Is quite simple unless you have a range of numbers that you think are all good for some design aspects. So that is very much a very narrow definition of what it could be to transform it. Or number two is a menu of options. So selecting from a list, 2 or more options, that would provide more flexibility on how standards might be met. And so they might be more flexible depending on site conditions or the typology of the housing unit or any of those things. There's another way to make them more subjective, and that's to assign points and prioritize a list of things like amenities that can be changed. You can change these over time to reflect the city's values, but that would provide some flexibility to the applicant, and also create an objective system by which a project can be judged. Also, part of this is considering an alternative path for compliance. And so this gives really the applicant an out if they don't want to meet the objective design standards for any particular reason. And we think there's usually a good reason, especially if it has to do with design or site constraints. They could choose to instead to meet the design guidelines that the city has and then go through a more discretionary review with the Planning Commission or the Planning Director. So those are some ways of making the subjective regulations more objective. Next, please. So in order to understand how these regulations are applied, we interviewed the City of Emeryville's Planning Division staff and architects and applicants who have completed multiple multifamily housing and mixed-use projects in the city and are very familiar with the city's regulations. These interviews helped us to, they help determine how regulations are applied to project applications, and really talk about how effective those policies are in achieving objectives. So we asked about a lot of things in there, but in these 2 slides here, this one will cover strengths and then other one will cover weaknesses. What we found was the strengths of the design review process and standards is that it's really doing its job in regulating and making projects better. And so it's also not really seen as a big, extensive or prescriptive system currently. So those are really great things. And they generally make sense and they're flexible. However, if they, so the design guidelines, they are pretty flexible and allow for a variety, which is positive, but also sometimes that leads to uncertainty in the process, in the decision and discretionary review process. So we recognize that design guidelines are still needed from the interviews. They help establish the intent for the project design based on all the factors that go into the project, and that the design review process really does help to make projects better looking, better functioning, and more compatible. So how can the process, we can really think about how this can be streamlined in our project. That's really what we've gained from that. On the next slide are the weaknesses of the design review process and standards. So, subjective guidelines are discretionary, and so the application can sometimes not be applied consistently, and it gets a lot harder for smaller projects. And then off-site improvements are sometimes a little unclear and not known upfront. So that is another weakness. Subjective qualities are also might also be defined by objective standards, but they could limit. So this is a real concern that they could limit the opportunity for good design. And so actually designers were recommending incentives instead of these for specific kinds of characteristics rather than mandates through the numerical, for example, or when you turn something from should to shall in the language in that kind of way. So also there's a desire for these standards to allow for variety, innovation, and things that we do not foresee right now, but things really do change over time, especially to do with the design. And then also that there are probably parts of the building code that regulate many aspects of building design, which we need to address as we look through it even more and how that plays into the process. So, the takeaways are, how can we remain flexible enough to accommodate future trends with our translation of subjective to objective criteria? And how can we avoid being too prescriptive and stifle creativity? These are the 2 biggest things that we're wondering about as we dive into how to transform these. So on the next slide is really our next steps, and we're about to start into our discussion portion. But in our next steps, we're really trying to, with your help, identify priority design guidelines that are necessary for multifamily and residential mixed-use projects. And actually, I just wanted to add in here that this is really for those projects that it applies to, SB 35 projects that are only reviewed on objective design standards. And so this is really trying to focus on those projects in particular. So how do we develop these standards? We'll start writing them to try to retain the design intent of the priority guidelines, but we need to make sure that they capture what we want so that if they come in and build something by right, it is exactly something that is acceptable in the city of Emeryville. So here we again have the list of key topics, and we may come back to this so that it might help us in our discussion. But our one big question to you for our discussion, which we'll turn to in just a minute, is on the next slide. This question is, what aspects of design are important to you and would you want addressed in the objective standards? So with that, we conclude our presentation. And so we'll leave up the question for a moment. If you need to, we can always turn back to the slide prior to this to refer to any of the particular topics that you'd like. And so we'll turn it back to perhaps Mayor to call on members of the City Council.
I really appreciate the concise presentation. Are there any clarifying questions at this point, colleagues, or with your indulgence, I'll check and see if there's public comment actually, and then we can have a more robust discussion, I think. So at this time, I'll check in with our city clerk to see if anyone has submitted electronic comment on this item.
Not at this time, no.
Okay, and I am looking at the attendees list, and I will remind attendees that you would use the raise hand feature in Zoom, or if you're calling in by phone, please press *9 to be recognized. And I do see one raised hand, so Sherry, when you can, please unmute the speaker and give them 3 minutes.
All right, you have 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, so what's critical here is what you're the title of this is that you're looking for opportunities to streamline the development review process. Streamline. Why should we be streamlining it? I mean, that's taken as a given. It's a given good, but I don't accept that. I think we should be making it more onerous, more considered. Remember, when you streamline it, it's to deregulate. There's nothing wrong with government regulations. That's how we build a livable place. The more regulatory, the more onerous it is, the more considered it is, and the more the odds are for a better project. So I heard this presentation tonight, and this is basically a plea for making Emeryville more bland and mediocre, regardless of the lamentations notwithstanding that. Right there in the beginning of the presentation, it was said that there's high quality housing will be a result of the streamlining process. But it's my contention that high quality housing is antithetical to a streamlined process. It's going to kind of make it harder to design especially a unique or a vernacular architectural language in Emeryville, and everything's going to be more uniform. And I've noticed that since I've lived in Emeryville for 42 years, that's been our direction. We've been tearing down our vernacular architectural heritage and replacing it with this bland sort of anywhere, any city, USA architectural ethos, which I think has been a mistake. And you hear all these planning experts tell us about how wonderful it is, but we've lost our legacy, our architectural legacy, and it was in fact vernacular, and we've lost that pretty much, and pretty much nothing left. and now they want to make it even more bland. And I think it's a really bad idea. And anytime you streamline something, my ears prick up, and it's like it brings me back to the days of Nora Davis. She was always looking for ways to streamline government regulation to make it less onerous for developers. And so perhaps in this naming everything after Nora Davis mania that we got in Emeryville right now, maybe we should call this process we're talking about right here, right now, the Nora Davis Streamlined Housing Developer Regulations. We could call it that, name it after her. And then lastly, I'll just say this sort of reminds me of basically Robert Moses from the 50s. And he had a unified vision too, and it was a very streamlined vision of city planning, and maybe we could name it also after him, Robert Moses.
Good time. Thank you, Speaker. And seeing no other hands raised, we're going to end public comment right now, and I'm just going to take a point of privilege to address the Speaker. We are undergoing this exercise to come into compliance with state laws, specifically the Housing Accountability Act, Senate Bill 35, and Senate Bill 330. So this is not an undertaking that we have just chosen to go through to appease specific developers or any developers. This is actually something that we have to do to be in compliance with the law. But with that, I'll bring it back to our colleagues. So I believe the question that we're being asked is which specific design elements, if any, we would like them to consider more heavily as they're going through the process of trying to create these objective standards. I know I've got my list, but I'd love to hear from you folks. So does anyone want to kick it off? Member Donahue.
When you're building some things, there's a lot of things to consider. One of the things that was not on the list that nonetheless should be considered was smell. What if the garbage area was right next to major air intake for multifamily housing? Is there an objective way to quantify smell and thereby disallow for horrid garbage smell being pumped into the system of ventilation for the hallways and multifamily housing? There's an example where maybe there could be a way to come up with some smell objective measurement in particles, billions of particles per cubic inch or something like that. And then I have a number of things I'd love to keep talking about, but should I stop and just leave that one there and I'll have additional opportunity?
Let's answer that one first. Is there anyone who feels like they could answer the smell question?
So this is Jane. That's a very important condition. And I think actually this one, you don't necessarily need a numerical objective standard for it. You would just simply require garbage areas to be far away from intakes. And if you wanted, you could say, within X number of feet, they can't be located. So that we're definitely noting this as one of the ideas.
Great, thank you, Jane. Scott, go ahead.
I'm thinking about, we're trying to get more affordable housing in Emeryville, and ideally, ownership affordable housing is, I know, something we've talked about in the past. Is there a way for us to make some process for objective standards that allow for ownership condos, for example, to have very little of the internal spaces built out, but people could buy into these greatly reduced cost building shells, and then they would later as owners, take care of building them out. This is being done in Colombia, in Bogota, for example, and it's working. Could we do that here in Emeryville in some objective way?
This is Jane again, and I think, yes, we could always put in some, I don't know exactly how to write this, but I think that's a very interesting, and I've seen that example before, and it really does reduce the threshold for ownership. So I would say there's probably a way to write it. We're, again, noting it and trying to figure out maybe there might be some other parts of it that we might need to address as far as requiring ownership. But however, it's a good idea.
All right, Scott, you got any others?
I could keep going here.
Go ahead.
I have questions about, we have subjective visions of our history in a lot of our documents. Is there, what's going to happen to that, or should we be concerned with that, especially when it comes to remodeling buildings that are considered historic by us right now? Often a lot of brick commercial structures that get remade into multifamily housing, and some component of them survives on because of the character of the original building is still there. I could cite examples around our town where that was done. Is that possible to retain some of that sentiment, or a lot of that sentiment, with these objective standards?
So I think can I reframe your attempt to reframe your question, Scott, with maybe setting these objective standards? Are they for the entire city, or are they for very specific projects that are going to fall under SB 35 and 330 and, into that niche, into that flow of approvals? Or are we looking at changes to standards that will affect other development and development in general and redevelopment?
So with the reframe question, I think that's actually very helpful to say that the objective design standards as a way of approval is only for the SB 35 projects. So things like historic buildings, especially anything registered or considered historic, will go through a different kind of process. And I would like to ask if there's any staff who want to clarify further, because I am sure there's other considerations.
Yes, Mayor Martinez, members of the council, this is Charlie Bryant, your planning director. We hadn't really talked about this too much with our consultants, but as you know, the city does have a whole list of what we call significant structures. We don't use the word historic in our regulations, so it's a bit of a gray area as to whether this would fall under the exceptions of SB 35 regarding historic properties. But I would say that list of significant structures is reasonably objective. For each property, we have indicated on the list what the features of the property are that make it significant. And I think we would probably be talking about a multifamily residential project that was reusing a significant structure. I don't think there's anything in Councilmember Donahue's scenario, I don't think there's anything under SB 35 that says that these have to be brand new buildings. I think as long as the project were renovating a significant structure and retaining the features that our list indicates are significant features, which I would maintain is a fairly objective list, that it could be processed under an objective standards process.
Does that answer your question, Scott? Very good. Anyone else would like to supply some comments to our consultants? Member Bedina?
Yeah, thank you for that wonderful presentation and for the report, which I found really helpful in starting to break down what is obviously a very large and complex process. I think the things that are important for us to prioritize are those things that we have put on our city priority list as Emeryville values. And so I'd want to start with, transit, access to transit for residents, vicinity of transit. Are we giving Clipper cards out? For bikes, I think we can create objective standards like storage facilities, parking, bike parking on the exterior of the facility, ramps, bike ramps up the side of steps, elevator fit for cargo bikes and other bikes, allowing bikes and elevators, which some buildings do not do, access to electricity for electric bikes in the bike storage facility. I'd like to see us come up with these sort of robust objective standards around transit access, bike access. And again, I think we've done a ton of work, around parking already with our parking minimums. If we need to further refine those standards, that could be right in there as well. I think open space is very important in such a small town. And I have to say, and this might be out of left field for me, one of the things that feels to me like an Emeryville value is the fact that when you walk around our developed spaces, especially Wareham buildings, we have really nice landscaping. So perhaps we could come up with some more objective standards around landscaping and open space, because that is the thing that I think is noticeable about our town is how pleasant it is with a lot of public, and also public art, I think should definitely be on that list as well. So those were just a few that I had started to think through and how we could make those more objective.
Great, thank you. And I saw that one of our consultants, Jean, had a hand raised. Did you want to interject?
Not right now, I'll wait. I just got kicked out of the presenters group, that's all.
Oh, okay, you're back. All right. Would anyone else like to give comments before I go? Member Bowders?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would agree with Councilmember Medina. I would add to bike infrastructure. I think there's several other items that were of interest to me. Building materials is of interest to me. I think we should have a conversation. I think that should be more than just the siding for building materials, but I think it should also include glass. I mean, we have bird safe building design guidelines in place that apply to larger commercial buildings. I'd like to see how that could be standardized for all new buildings in the city as a way of actually making our city environmentally friendly, because I think that matches up nicely with some of the landscaping ideas that I've heard as being standardized. There's a real need for communities to make bird and bee friendly communities right now. I am also interested in, I think Allie mentioned parking, but I'm interested in delivery in particular and delivery design around buildings. Right now they park in bike lanes and in crosswalks and on sidewalks. And I'm in a lot of conversations with large developers in our city and delivery companies in our city about all the challenges that exist between the current delivery systems and the buildings that have been built. And so I think we need to have some very clear guidelines to bring all delivery inside. And I think when I think of this, I'm thinking of like how to co-locate delivery bays next to where package rooms are in buildings, right? So the reasons delivery companies give me why they pull up in the bike lane is because, sure, you've given us a yellow curb on the other street, or there's a delivery bay over here, but it's not anywhere near the room where the package room is. And so the driver doesn't want to go through a whole maze of a building to deliver packages. And I don't think we're thinking through what the driver's goals are in relation to usability. So I think there should be stronger standards around that. One that that's like really important in my mind, that's, I think everyone here will remember, we have extremely subjective standards as it relates to the demolition of homes. And there's no way to objectively protect against displacement. But in our community, when we demolish single family and duplex homes, and I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself in a second, because I also believe when we do our housing element, we need to make some zoning changes that if we don't make them, the state's going to impose some on us anyways. But I think that the balance there, right, is as the state is about to do that to us, we need to create objective standards about when it is acceptable to demolish a home. And it should not be that the applicant has simply told us the systems in the home are old, and so therefore it is not acceptable. Maybe the applicant should have to pay for the cost of someone to do an evaluation that the city retains. And if the cost of replacing the systems, repairing all the systems and repairing the home is cheaper than building a new home, maybe the home shouldn't be eligible for demolition. So I'm trying to think of ways to quantify and objectify that, because I think people just come in and like to tell us that single family homes are in bad condition. And in the process of doing that, the occupants of the homes are the people who we're losing out. And so I want to see design standards around demolition and protections against the reckless demolition of homes, because our current standards apparently are too subjective. I've said bike infrastructure, delivery bays, windows. It's not, I think I'll save this. I'll just put a flag in the sand on this right now, because we could do this now, but I think this is going to be part of our RENA discussion and our housing element. But I think that our bonus structure, while I like our design guidelines around our bonus structure, I think that the 12.5% to 17.5% affordability range should move to 15 to 20. And it should have been there from the beginning, in my opinion. And I know former Councilmember Asher and I talked about that at the time, and there was a compromise reached, I think, to get this in place. But I have been sorely wanting to change that to 15 to 20. And I think we could do that as part of this, because it's really simple, or we could save that conversation for the RENA discussion and how we get to RENA. But I just strongly believe that that is an objective standard in our bonus point system, and I would like to see that expanded. Those are my comments.
Member Pats?
So I waited too long to share, and most of the good ideas have been taken, but I want to go through my list anyways to second some of the things. From what Member Bowders was talking about, and sort of Scott as well, we have an opportunity to make sure that our codes are modernized and really reflect modern living. And so I'll echo both bike bays, bike charging stations, but that applies to parking in general. If a developer decides to have parking, let's make sure it meets current electric car needs versus just a place to let a car die. I also agree that we have moved away from those vehicles, and we need to deal with the delivery economy and the fact that things are coming to us. So anything along the lines of what Member Bowders was saying about having a reasonable place for deliveries is something that just needs to be in there. And this kind of goes along with the environmental impact of buildings and the building materials. You know, there are some objective standards out there to make sure those things are happening as well. And so I want to just, you know, whether it's the bird safe or other building materials that we talk about, I think this is really an opportunity to talk about those things. And then I do want to echo the idea around open space, landscaping, setbacks, and things like that it's getting much more limited by the state laws, but encouraging thoughtful and both aesthetically pleasing and environmentally friendly use of those are really necessary in such a small and such an urban environment. I don't know if I clearly stated that, so I'll say it one more time. Making sure that open space remains a requirement based on the size of the project, and making sure that that open space is more than just hardscape, but also takes into account that we live in a very drought-prone area, so thoughtful design on that. And then this is not really part of this discussion, but I always want to make sure that we keep in mind as we go forward through all of these updates and things, that one of our objective standards on larger projects is our unit mix and maintaining the current unit mix requirements. And hopefully the state won't take that away from the town. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Member Pats. I'll echo what you said, that all the good ideas were taken. But essentially the way I framed my thoughts around this are the experience of people walking and biking through our town. So that made me lean more towards sidewalks, bikes, transit, street frontage, and then art as well for that user experience and landscaping. So all the planting around developments. And then just to kind of further drive that home, I just wanted to let the consultants know that what I care about least is form, massing, articulation. I do not want to see any objective standards like we need a roof to vary in height by 4 feet in this area and 5 feet in this area. Like I really, if we're creating affordable housing, that's the last thing on my mind. And I would want to see the, I don't know what you mean by. Stop it, Siri. I'd want to see those units maximized for those people who are going to live in them. And I appreciate what Member Bowders said about delivery design. I was just thinking today about automated cars. And if we had the automated cars that industry had promised to us 5 years ago, they would be using they would not be able to deliver anything because they would be they'd be in compliance with all of our painted lines on the road, and there would be nowhere to drop anything off for many of our multifamily residents in town. So 100% we need to prioritize that and make sure that developers are accommodating for the way that people receive goods and shop in modern times, as Member Pats aptly put it. We need to address how people live now and how they're going to live in the future. So I also want to agree with what Vice Mayor Donahue brought up with the garbage receptacles, but again, from that perspective of people on the street, I know as I was going through our many design guideline documents, one of the bad examples was a building in San Diego with a dumpster right on the sidewalk, and that was really sad. We don't want to see that in Emeryville, and we don't want to encourage that. We want to make sure that trash receptacles are not only in protected areas away from air intake, but away from the sidewalk as well. So I think there's a lot of agreement that I heard. Scott, did you want to make further comments?
Yes. Likely to come back to the council soon from the Sustainability Committee is future multifamily housing being all electric. And, I think that that's likely to be endorsed for most cities in California because it actually costs less to build without natural gas as a part of the structures. But also the sustainability side of this maybe should be objectified to other things. For example, that wood and building with more and more wood is in effect storing carbon. And it's really been pointed out that using more wood in construction and less concrete is a significant difference in our environmental impact going forward. And so maybe we should look at some way to encourage the use of wood, which stores carbon and could replace as much concrete as possible in our future structures.
Thank you for bringing that up about electrification, especially since that's a direction that we may be headed toward in general. And to that point, we might also want to have these projects be solar ready, because I think that's low hanging fruit.
Yes.
Are folks comfortable with the list that we've supplied to staff and to our consultants for them to move forward, to continue to do this work? Member Bowders?
I just have a question. I mean, looking at the process that was outlined on the one slide, if we come up with an idea, if we forgot something, like is it like lost, or are we going to just drop it on people when they come back in the fall?
Who'd like to answer that?
It should be at a meeting that the council provides any additional direction to staff about what should be going in the list.
Okay, that's fine.
One question, just Madam Mayor, was the question that Navarre posed at the beginning is whether the council is interested in a joint session with the Planning Commission. So we'd love your feedback on that. And that, to Councilmember Bowders' question, would be another opportunity to provide that feedback.
How are folks feeling? Do you want to get ready to eat sandwiches with our planning commission? What would be the timeline, City Manager Daniel?
I would defer to Navarre or Charlie on that, because I think there's an expectation from the planning commission as well.
We didn't give us, the commission didn't give us a specific date, but they would like it to happen sooner rather than later. And we were thinking about sometime in June, probably within the first couple of weeks of June. So it'd just be like a month or so from now.
How are folks feeling? Do we want to convene with the planning commission or give them their own work out their comments?
If I could, Madam Mayor, just an observation. This item for the planning commission was the last item on a very long agenda, and they adjourned at 11:30 after having started this item at 10:30. And they really felt like they didn't have time to get into it in the depth that they would have liked to. So that was the reason for their request for a special meeting. I feel like your discussion tonight has been quite thorough and robust, and we'd certainly welcome the participation of the City Council in a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. But I do feel like you've had a very good conversation tonight that the Planning Commission didn't really have the opportunity to have yet. So that's what the meeting will be about for the Commission.
And I think we've given them a lot to chew on without adding more layers on top of it. I feel that, if we have a joint session, they'll still be catching up with everything that we said.
So if I could jump in, Madam Mayor, one thought would be the Planning Commission could have its next round, and then staff could bring an information report to the council that combines what we heard from you tonight and also the feedback from the Planning Commission, and you could have a chance to have a policy discussion before anybody went off and did any further drafting, if that's something that would be helpful.
I think that makes sense to me. Are folks supportive of that? Okay. All right, great. Any further questions or comments on this topic? Okay, I will close out this meeting. Thank you very much to staff for the concise and clear report. I really appreciated the PowerPoint. It really helped me focus my own thoughts. But I will bring this meeting to a close. The time is 7:18 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. And I will rely on my clerk to let me know when to begin the next meeting.
All right, I'm just going to clean up the screen a little bit, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, Charlie, I think can go. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. For anyone watching at home, we have just adjourned our special study session, which began at 6:15, and we are now convening at 7:18 p.m. the City of Emeryville as successor agency to the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency. Today is still Tuesday, May 18th, and please bear with me as I read some introductory remarks. I'd like to state for the record that this meeting is being conducted by teleconference pursuant to the Brown Act waivers provided for under the Governor's executive order in response to the COVID-19 state of emergency. During the public health emergency, City Hall is closed to the public. The agenda states that the public may view the meeting that is being live streamed online and on ETV channel 27 and provide comment by submitting an online comment form, which will then be read into the record by staff. The comment form can be accessed by going to our main City of Emeryville website at emeryville.org and clicking on Council Agendas and Videos. Once there, you will see a link entitled Submit an Online Speaker Card. The public also has the option of participating in tonight's meeting via Zoom and may provide public comment during the meeting using the Raise Your Hand feature visible on your screen, or if you're calling in, press the *9. The Zoom call-in information was provided on the posted agenda, as well as e-notification on social media. So I will now turn to the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Bouders?
Here.
Councilmember Medina.
Present.
Councilmember Pats.
Here.
Vice Mayor Donahue.
Here.
And Mayor Martinez.
Here. Next up, we have approval of the final agenda. I will go ahead and make a motion to approve the final agenda. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I have a motion by me and a second by Member Medina. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember Pats.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
And Mayor Martinez.
Aye. Are there any excommunications to report on this meeting? Seeing none, now is the time for public comment. Anyone who wishes to make comments related to items not on the agenda or on the consent agenda should have submitted your online speaker card by now. 3 minutes will be allowed for the city clerk to read your comments into the record. If you are participating in tonight's meeting via Zoom, please use the raise your hand feature visible on your screen, or if you're calling in, press *9. And at this time, I'll check in with our city clerk to see if anyone has submitted any electronic comments.
No electronic comments at this time.
Okay, and I'm checking in with the attendees list. As a reminder, please use the raise hand feature to be recognized, or if you're calling in, press *9. I see one hand raised. Clerk, please unmute the speaker and allow them 3 minutes.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I stepped out for a moment. Are we on the regular meeting or are we on this?
This is the successor agency meeting.
Okay, no comment from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. I will now close public comment, seeing no other speakers. We have the consent calendar to consider next. Colleagues, or if they're barring any questions or concerns about this, I'll entertain a motion in a second.
The consent calendar.
I second.
I have a motion by Member Bowders and a second by Vice Mayor Donahue. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember Pats.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
And Mayor Martinez.
Aye, that passes unanimously, and at 7:22 p.m., this meeting is adjourned. Sherry, let me know when you're ready for the main event.
All set.
All right, I am calling to order the regular meeting of the Emeryville City Council. It's still Tuesday, May 18th, and the time is 7:23 p.m. I will presume that we are all still here from the minute ago that we called roll. And please just remember my introductory comments, and I'll remind folks that we are attending via Zoom. Next up for the final agenda, I do have one change to make. I'm going to move item 11.1 after our action items 12.1 and 12.2. And this is just procedurally, we shouldn't amend the master fee schedule until after we handle our action items. So I will go ahead and move the final agenda with that change. Do I have a second?
Second to motion.
There's a motion by myself and a second by Member Bowders. Any questions or concerns about that? Nope. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember Pats.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
And Mayor Martinez.
Aye, and that passes unanimously. We have no special orders of the day. Sherry, would you like to give the announcement on commission and committee vacancies?
Yes, just to say that the application period ended on Monday, May 17th at 5, and the appointments will be made at your meeting on June 15th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up, we have council members' special announcements and reports on meeting attendance. Anyone have anything that they'd like to report?
I'll just make it a special announcement that the ribbon cutting for the Gilman interchange, which includes phase 1 is the bike pedestrian bridge between the east side of the 8580 freeway and the Gilman JPA fields, as well as the Bay Trail that goes behind Golden Gate Fields there. That will take place at 1 p.m. on Thursday. It's virtual if you'd like to attend. I don't usually celebrate highway projects, but I'm celebrating phase 1, which is the bike ped bridge overcrossing. So if you'd like to join me for that part of it, you may.
Great. Thank you, Member Bowders. I just want to thank staff for working to provide a COVID vaccination site, but I will allow the city manager to give the details on that. But I just think it's really, really great that we're going to make use of our senior center and provide that service to the community. But I'll move it to the city manager's report, Christine, if you want to just let people know how to sign up for that.
We're going to thank you, Madam Mayor, and just want to thank Pedro Jimenez and Kim Burrows and the Community Services Department, who've really been working hard to get this to Emeryville. And it's taken us a minute because I guess it's a good thing we didn't qualify like other parts of the county, but it's time. They have been reaching out to seniors, particularly homebound seniors. That's been our big target audience. We had initially been told by the county that the date would be the 27th. That has changed, and we will be pushing that information out. They double booked us with another location, but because we've been working with folks to get them signed up for rides, we'll be able to reach out to people individually. So please stay tuned for the news flash and other media information about that. It will be very soon around the same timeline, but we did have to change the date. It will still be the senior center. Homebound seniors will still be our target audience. So
great, thank you so much for doing that. Is the target still to use the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, so we have the one and done scenario?
That's our understanding, but we don't control that ultimate decision, but that is really the hope.
Okay, well, thank you. And as Christine said, because I had been making those phone calls too when vaccination started rolling out, but we didn't qualify for those mobile sites because folks in our community were doing very well at masking and getting themselves vaccinated. So I'm proud of those folks, and now it's our job to take care of those folks who need a little extra help in getting vaccinated. So thank you for that, Christine. Folks, are there any ex parte communications to report for this evening? Okay, seeing none, now's the time for the public comment portion of the regular meeting of the City Council. So if anyone was waiting around for that, now is the time. Anyone who wishes to make comments related to items not on the agenda or on the consent agenda should have submitted your online speaker card by now. 3 minutes will be allowed for the city clerk to read your comments into the record. Or if you're participating tonight via Zoom, you may use the raise hand feature to be recognized. Or if you're calling in, press *9 and that will raise your hand and we'll be able to recognize you. And I see one caller with a hand raised. But just a moment, let me just check in with our clerk to see if anyone has submitted electronic comment.
No comments at this time.
All right, well then, Madam Clerk, please go ahead and unmute the speaker. You will have 3 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
On May 4th, the five of you named a day of service in Emeryville after former council member Nora Davis, as you recall. And there's, I guess you're partaking in this current mania to name things after Nora Davis. She was extremely popular with the right wing in Emeryville, and so they really want to name a lot of stuff after her. And now that she's no longer with us, the council included. But I think you made that was a mistake, because Nora Davis does not have Emeryville values. She was anti-Measure C, the living wage for hotel workers in Emeryville, where we increased the wages of hotel workers to $9 an hour. Nora Davis was against that, and she called people that supported that in Emeryville dupes for eBase. She was against the Doyle Hollis Park, extremely popular park. She was railed against that. She was against bikes on the South Bayfront Bike Ped Bridge. She thought it should be only for pedestrians, no bikes allowed. She was against the entire bike plan. At the last minute, when it came time to implement and to say yes to the plan, she and Kurt Brinkman, her sidekick, voted no to the bike plan. She voted to privatize or close down ECDC. And so I don't know why you want to honor a person like that is so antithetical to modern Emeryville values. I mean, we've had other people serve longer than Nora has in Emeryville. Like I'm thinking of the Lacoste family, John and Al. Al was mayor and John was a chief of police, and they're extremely corrupt, and right wing, but they ran Emeryville for longer than Nora Davis did. So why aren't we naming things after the Lacoste family? It's because they're known as being corrupt. So we should not be naming things after the Lacoste family, but nor should we be naming things after Nora Davis, because she wasn't corrupt, not that we know of, but she certainly did not have our values that we have now. So I don't know why, it doesn't make any sense to me why you would have done that. And I think you should stop doing that and don't join this right-wing Nora Davis naming mania that's going on. I just think it's really bad public policy. It sets a really terrible message that we love and value right-wingers and hate parks, hate bikes, hate living wages for hotel workers, just hate labor. She was extremely anti-labor. I don't know what you were thinking when you did that.
That's your time. I see another speaker with their hand raised. Sherry, please unmute Kim, and you will have 3 minutes.
Go ahead, Kim.
It's actually Bob and Kim.
Okay. Go ahead, Bob and Kim.
Thank you. I'm here to speak about the recent experience of Emerygate, which is a 17-unit condominium development, 6 units of which are in Emeryville and 11 are in Oakland. And recently, the 17 families who live there learned about East Bay MUD's private sewer lateral program. It's a well-intended program designed to inspect and repair or replace old and inadequate private sewer laterals. Although Emerygate's only 20 years old, it's captured and bound by this program. EBMUD, I guess, has been working on this program for about 11 years. And under it, condominium developments are required to complete several modifications. Of large condominium developments are being given until July 12, 2026, 5 years, to complete the necessary compliance. And EBMUD will allow 3 additional years if more than 50% of their private sewer lateral system is being replaced. In contrast, a small condo development such as Emerygate is faced with replacing its entire sewage lateral system. And it's only allowed until July 12, 2021, that's 7 weeks from now, to complete the required work or face draconian fines by EBMUD of up to $10,000 per day for non-compliance. This isn't enough flexibility for smaller PSL systems. So Emerygate is requesting that Emeryville work with East Bay MUD to extend that deadline for small condominium developments. And we're prepared to provide much more detailed information in writing that talks about this. I want to mention that I haven't until recently had a chance to look at the notices which came from EBMUD about this. But they were very general and didn't anticipate huge expense. The 4 plumbing companies we've contacted for advice have now estimated that the cost to Emerygate's condominium owners could be as much as $100,000 or more, depending on test results. And right now, their minimal test results indicate that a complete replacement is necessary to the system because when it was built by the cities of Oakland and Emeryville, they used ceramic pipe, which is no longer popular. So we think that the way it's been handled is not supportive of small condominium developments, and we hope that we can provide you further information and enlist your assistance in dealing with this situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, speakers. Because this item or this issue is not on our agenda, we cannot give you substantive feedback on that, but I can direct staff to if Bob and Kim, if you'd kindly email our city manager, we can have them at least respond to you and let you know if there is an intervention that the city could provide. To have the council do anything as a policy matter, I don't think that we'd be able to help you in time to be productive, but we will certainly have staff respond to you. So thank you for your comments. And then I wanted to check in with our city attorney to see if I could take a personal point of privilege to respond to the first speaker in public comment.
You may briefly do so.
Okay, I'll just briefly say that Nora Davis and I may have had some different policy objectives, but she worked really hard for Emeryville, and the city would look really different if she had not served on our city council. And I'm happy with the decision that we made. So let's move on, shall we? Next up, we have our consent items. Colleagues, if you have any questions or anything you'd like to pull, now would be the time. If you do not, I'd be happy to entertain a motion and a second on the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Member Pats, a second from Vice Mayor Donahue, and please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Donahue?
Aye.
And Mayor Martinez.
Aye, that passes unanimously. And that brings us to item 12.1, a reminder that we're just taking things slightly out of order and handling the action items before the public hearings. Item 12.1 is the first reading of an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville establishing a vehicle share policy as Chapter 14 of Title 4 of the Emeryville Municipal Code. And do we have a presentation this evening?
Yes.
We do. We have Nancy Emeryville Humphrey, who will be.
Nancy, you know, we haven't made a policy yet for everyone to change their middle name to Emeryville. I appreciate you taking that first step.
You know, I'm all in. Good evening, or almost good afternoon at this time of year. Madam Mayor and members of council, it's Nancy Humphrey with Public Works, and I'm here to present a proposed vehicle share ordinance. Before I get started, I want to point out that the dates on the ordinance in your packet are incorrect. They're still aimed at the previous council meeting, so that's something that will have to be changed, but the rest of the content is correct. Okay, so this is a vehicle share ordinance. You've seen this same picture in my recent dockless mobility ordinance discussions, but this is vehicle share, which at the moment consists of cars and electric mopeds. And our neighboring cities are already operating these systems. Both Oakland and Berkeley have one free-floating car share company and one free-floating electric moped company working, and they're getting good response. So given the regional nature of transportation, and especially Emeryville's relationship to regional transit, we wanted to make this proposed ordinance as compatible to our neighboring cities' ordinances as we could. And so most of the provisions in this proposed ordinance are the same or compatible with those in Emeryville in Oakland and Berkeley. We did add two things. We added kind of trying to have some parity with what we had already discussed and thought through in relation to dockless. We did add some provisions for affordability in our ordinance that aren't in the other cities' ordinances. There used to be a sticker system. Oh, I'm sorry. We should be on the next slide, Sherry. There used to be a sticker system by which these vehicles would be identified, but now it's all by license plate reader. So that's how it'll be handled. All right, next slide, please, Sherry. The key provisions are that the service would have to serve the entire city, the entire geographic area of the city. There would be a provision if after a period of time of operation, an operator wanted to petition to shrink the footprint, that there would be a procedure for them to try and make that case and maybe get a variance on that. But at the beginning, they'd have to serve the entire city. They have to offer an affordability option. They have to provide system data in MDS format, which is the same format we have asked for with the dockless ordinance. And they can only use low emission vehicles. Next, please, Sherry. So one-way car share, right now in this region, the provider of this is GIG, which is a company under a parent AAA. They are, well, in our proposal, they would be allowed in metered and non-metered spaces. If they park in a zone designated for 2-hour parking or more, they can stay for up to 72 hours in that spot. The user does not pay the meter. If they're in a zone designated for under 2 hours, they must adhere to the time limit. They can't park in residential permit parking zones. Next, please. Electric moped share, and in this region right now, the only provider is Revel. And Revel, these mopeds would be able to park at any curb area except a red curb. They park perpendicular. They can park in a spot up to 72 hours. They must provide helmets, and they must offer hands-on training for users who would want that before they take one out. All right, next. And then last, we have some dedicated space vehicle share spaces in Emeryville. I could find 4 in 3 locations. They were originally installed under an agreement with the TMA in 2010. That was only for a year, and no agreement has been put in place since then. So this is formalizing that program and including them in elements of this ordinance that would require an annual permit with permit payment and same key provisions. But these have dedicated spaces, so there's no issue with meter payment. All right, next. And as to the costs for operators, for any of these modes, there's a permit application fee of $2,500 with a $1,000, or this is proposed, with a $1,000 renewal fee. That mirrors our dockless ordinance. For all, there's a $5,000 permit issuance fee annually. For one-way car share, there's a deposit required at the issuance of the permit toward expected meter costs and periodic true-ups to make it cost neutral, to ensure correct payment. And they provide information on where the cars were, when they were in meter zones, how many hours, how many vehicles, to get that cost. For designated space vehicle share, they would have this permit amount. They would, we would have cost recovery amounts for sign placement or striping if that was necessary on the city's behalf. And if the spot is in a meter designated zone, we would ask for meter repayment. Right now, none of the spots that are being used are in a metered parking zone. So that's all I've got for you. But I am here to answer questions or give more in-depth information if you need it.
Great, thank you, Nancy, and thank you for providing answers to previous questions from the council in the staff report. So I will turn to my colleagues and see if there are any clarifying questions for staff. Scott, go ahead.
why such a big difference in fees between Berkeley and Emeryville? It looks like Berkeley is subsidizing these services.
Yeah, Berkeley has so I'll tell you, Berkeley's fee is $2,870 per vehicle per year, as opposed to our $5,000 per operator plus meter costs. Berkeley is $2,870 plus meter costs. So actually, I think ours is lower, $5,000 toward 20 vehicles.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Oakland also does it by vehicle by year, and that's $1,278 per vehicle per year, plus residential parking permit and meter revenue recovery.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? If there are no questions, I would entertain a motion to read the ordinance by title only.
Oh, did we do public comment yet?
So in the conclusion on the staff report, it says to introduce the proposed ordinance by title only and then do public comment. Is that incorrect?
Correct.
Okay. So we can introduce and then I'll call for public comment, Sherry.
Thank you.
I'll make the motion. Move to read by title only.
I'll second.
I have a motion by myself and a second by Member Pats. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Medina.
Aye.
Councilmember Pats.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Donahue.
Aye.
And Mayor Martinez.
Aye. And take it away, Madam City Attorney.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville establishing a vehicle share policy is Chapter 14 of Title 4 of the Emeryville Municipal Code, Program and Fees, CEQA determination exempt pursuant to State CEQA Guidelines 15061B3.
Thank you. And now I will call for public comment, first checking in with the clerk to see if anyone has submitted an electronic comment card.
No electronic comments at this time.
All right, and I'll remind members of the public who are joining us tonight, if you're using Zoom, please use the raise hand feature to be recognized. Or if you're calling in, please press *9. I saw a hand raised, but now I no longer do.
Oh, I already lowered the hand because I...
Oh, you did? Okay. So yeah, please go ahead and unmute the speaker, and speaker, you will have 3 minutes.
Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Guess who was against vehicle share for Emeryville or in Emeryville? Take a guess, City Council. The answer is Nora Davis. I heard her from the podium one time trash vehicle share. But of course she'd be against it because Nora Davis had a very right-wing view of public policy. Public policy should be very right-wing compared to, pro-development, anti-park, anti-people, pro-developer, pro-rich people, anti-poor people. That was her views compared to what we have now in Emeryville. And then speaking to what the mayor just said, that here's a quote from the mayor. Emeryville would look very different were it not for Nora Davis. And that's why the mayor thought it was a great idea to have start naming stuff after her, including the day of service. And that's a true statement. Emeryville would look very different were it not for Nora Davis. That's true, Mayor Martinez. Like, we wouldn't have all these low-slung suburban shopping malls with acres of baking asphalt out front for parking cars, for dead cars. We wouldn't have all that low-slung suburban models. Nora loved that. The developers wanted it, and so Nora would never go against a developer, but Nora actually liked that model. She actually was gleeful about that. Nora did not like city planning. She because it would tend to cut into the profits of developers. So she didn't like it. She thought city planning was a terrible idea. And but she did like low-slung suburban-style shopping malls in Emeryville. So the mayor is correct when she says Emeryville would look a lot different were it not for Nora Davis. We would be a much nicer-looking city with, vernacular architecture. It would be more urban and sophisticated, a lot less suburban model. I mean, it'd be a much nicer city, in all ways that I can think of, were it not for Nora Davis. So the mayor is correct in that regard. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further public comment, I'm going to go ahead and close the public comment period and bring it back to council for discussion and for a motion and a second. Is any member Bowders?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have one issue I'd like to discuss a little bit in the ordinance, just so I can understand. I reflect on the fact that I have seen this before, but in reviewing this in its totality as I prepared for the council meeting, I had one item I just wanted to talk about openly and just hear staff's thoughts on. So on page of the ordinance itself, it's page 5 of 14, and that's at the bottom of the page. It's section 4-14.103. It's the affordability section. I'm looking at subparagraph A. It says operators shall offer a discounted membership or rate for those who participate in the State Nutritional Assistance Program known as SNAP, or the California Alternative Rates for Energy Care Program. My question is about that they are required to participate in it as opposed to be eligible for it. And I understand that in terms of a verification process, this might have been the mindset that staff had in developing this way, was that a person could simply show a benefits letter from SNAP or CARE, and that would be sufficient for the operator and they wouldn't have to make a calculation. My concern with that is that two things. One, at the surface level, there's a lot of people who just can't or don't access SNAP. A lot of people from ethnic communities don't access SNAP because they have I don't mean to sound demeaning when I say it this way, but they have traditional viewpoints about accessing public benefits and they don't feel that those are benefits they should access. So there's a lot of low-income people who don't take advantage of these programs. Additionally, the other concern I have is that there's this is just a personal beef with federal assistance programs, but they have asset limits. So there's 3 steps to being eligible for SNAP. One is you have to be at or below 130% of the federal poverty guidelines with your income in terms of your gross income, and then your net income after deductions are made. The second standard is you have to be at or below 100%, but the third is the asset limit for families that are not seniors or people who have a disability. And the asset limit is like $2,500 or less, and that includes your car and a whole bunch of other things. And it's so stringent that there's a lot of low income families who, because they have some assets above it, they just wouldn't qualify. So I just wanted to hear from staff. I'm not saying that staff did this the wrong way. I just want to hear the thought process about why we wrote it this way so I can think about how I feel about that provision. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if I could just jump in on that one.
Please do.
This is language that mirrors the dockless shared mobility ordinance. So that's where it's derived from. So it's the same as that. But I would also share with the council, and Councilmember, sorry, I can't remember if we went into this in detail when we were at the Transportation Committee with this ordinance, but this is actually new, and it's one of the things I believe Ms. Humphrey identified as different from our neighboring cities. So we are introducing this into the vehicle share ordinance because we felt like it was an important component for this mode of sharing that our regional neighbors have not yet added. However, with that said, we are much smaller, and our capacity to implement a program that requires some kind of qualification that goes beyond other already established programs. Admittedly, there are limitations, of course, to these programs. We don't have the capacity to do that. And the providers, this was new for the providers, so there was some amount of discussion with them in terms of adding this into the ordinance. So it is something that they can relatively easily adapt to. So I would just ask if there was a request to revisit this, to maybe send the whole thing back, because we really need to think about it carefully if we want to open it up to something else.
Yeah, and I heard Nancy say that during the presentation. I am grateful that the staff recognize the council's values about making sure that we have affordable, equitable programs. And so I want to be very clear that I'm not, again, like I said, I'm not criticizing this. I'm just thinking about who are we maybe leaving through the net. And so perhaps a different thing would be to just pass this ordinance tonight with the understanding that if there are other programs that are in the same vein that perhaps have slightly different standards that could just be added to this list, because I think there are, I mean, it doesn't say county general assistance, for example, and people who are on general assistance don't have to go through all those same tests. And so, and you can get a benefits letter from the county. And so I'm just thinking that, to me, it felt a little narrow and exclusive, the list that was provided as eligible programs and the requirement that they participate in them when benefits can be turned on and off. Does that mean if a person doesn't submit, an income verification letter within a certain amount of time, are we going to say that, and the program, I mean, I'm sure others here, the city manager I know is really familiar with these programs. Like, you can be on food stamps 1 month and then off for literally 2 weeks and then put back on it. And so I just could see this causing problems for a low income earner. Also, I think people who live in a Section 8 unit or a subsidized housing unit who are eligible for federal housing assistance, to me, should be somebody who's eligible. So I just wanted to not criticize what's being put here, but just ask if the staff felt there was flexibility to expand the list a little bit, just to be a little more inclusive of people in the community, because I felt this list was a little narrow, knowing the definitions for these programs.
I think what we'd request is to bring back an amendment, because we'd want to talk to the providers about this too, because it took a fair bit of, I will say it took a fair bit of work to get where we're at. So there's certainly nothing that would preclude amending it later to be broader.
Can I ask a question about care? So the utility bills are usually in one person's name in a household, but that means that household is income qualified. I hope they're not going to be too stringent against another person living in the household, and that is and someone else is the bill payer in that home. And that's not necessarily for the ordinance, but just something to think about while we're on this topic. And I just want to let Member Bowders know that East Bay Community Energy is putting in great effort to enroll as many people as possible into care, because we see that cliff of utility protection going away, at the end of June with the shelter in place. So we're very cognizant of that and looking for every avenue to help people and enroll people who qualify, and really close those gaps. So I just want you to be aware of that work that we're doing.
I appreciate that. And I would agree and be supportive of what the city manager said in supporting this ordinance this evening. If there was simultaneous direction that for this very limited purpose of this specific paragraph, if there could be some additional, I don't know if it's a future agenda item I have to request to discuss that item in greater detail, or if that could be referred back to Transportation Committee for that limited purpose to discuss and recommend something. I'm open to whatever staff or council would like. I'm happy to support the ordinance today as long as we can just continue that discussion a little bit.
Madam Mayor, what I would recommend actually is that you direct us to come back to Transportation 6 months after implementation with some data on what the uptake has been with low-income participants for both ordinances, vehicle share and dockless, because I think it's an important question. I mean, I think obviously staff feels strongly about it too. And so if we can get some data from the providers and then have that conversation, I think we'll learn a lot, if that's acceptable.
Does that work for you, Member Bowders?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for asking. It does, with the understanding that the data would probably not include people who don't get approved. So I would ask them to then collect data on who is excluded or been denied.
Well, I was thinking, Councilmember, it would be a percentage of participants. So if we saw that it was very small, I mean, that's indicative right there. Right.
Okay. All right.
All right. Any other comments or questions, concerns before we move the ordinance?
This is Nancy Emeryville again.
Yes.
Just like to correct a oversight I had when I was speaking, which is I did not credit Diana Kina, who carried this ordinance since 2017 until her retirement at the end of last year. So, you know, she did a lot of the heavy lifting on this, and I wanted to give her credit where credit was due.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Nancy, for highlighting Diana's work. I'll go ahead and move the ordinance. John?
I was going to just, well, I'm happy to let you make the motion. I was just going to ask that whoever makes the motion then amend the date from March 4th to March 18th, or I'm sorry, May 4th to May 18th throughout the document, as it's currently listed as being adopted today. I would just, as long as all the May 4th are changed to May 18th.
Yes, and I'll make the motion with that correction. Do I have a second?
I'll second your motion.
So there's a motion by myself and a second by Member Bowders with the correction of the dates. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
I am very enthusiastic that we're finally getting this done, so thank you, staff.
Vice Mayor Donahue?
Aye.
And Mayor Martinez.
Aye, and I will thank staff as well, staff present and staff who have moved on. That will bring us to item 12.2. This is the discussion and direction on how to fill a city council vacancy. And we have two choices, which are the same choice. Who would like to present?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to step in with support from our valiant city clerk as needed. We are before you this evening as a result.
Is there a recusal that has to happen on this item?
There is not.
It says for direction, so that's why she read it, the instruction as direction.
I can let the city attorney respond, but I don't believe a recusal is required.
Okay.
May I respond?
Sorry, I was on mute. No recusal is required.
So if I may respond, Madam Mayor. So Councilmember Bowders, I had the same feeling you did and had the same concern. So while I will be present for these, I will not be offering a lot of my opinion or thoughts, but simply here as sheepishly supportive of what the other members decide, because I think it does appear icky to me while it's within the rules.
Very good. Madam City Manager, please continue.
So, Madam Mayor, you are, as a council, presented with one of your members having notified you that he intends to resign his seat on the council and create a vacancy. Government Code Section 36512 is the government code that gives you the process for how you fill a vacancy on a city council seat. When Councilmember Pats made his announcement, we went to work doing our research and determined that Government Code Section 36512 subsection D actually addresses a situation where a majority of the members would be appointed if you chose to appoint. So the government code generally allows councils two paths to fill a vacancy. Path one is to appoint, and path two is to hold an election. In this circumstance, under Elections Code Section 10229, the City Council chose to cancel the election of November 2020 because the three incumbents running did not have anybody who filed against them. That is under the Elections Code. That's perfectly appropriate, of course. And under the Elections Code, then those council members are considered appointed. The Elections Code said the council members serve as if elected, but they are actually technically appointed. So when Councilmember Pats announced his resignation, you were effectively precluded from appointing his replacement by the government code provisions for filling a vacancy, because then you would have a majority of your council as appointed. So that's the jigsaw puzzle of the government code. But where you land is Government Code Section 36512D, which gives you the option of calling an election to be held at the next regularly established election date, or the government code says if you don't, the election will be held at the next regularly established election date. under Elections Code section, oh, Andrew, I'm going to get this wrong, 1000, I believe. The next regularly established election is November 2nd in California. So if you were to call the election at your July 6th meeting for November 2nd, then it would be a relatively normalized election process with a nominations period opening on the 13th, I believe, of July and closing in early August. However, you can't take an action as a council until the member has actually resigned. So until and unless Member Pat submits his letter to the city clerk as required by another section of the code, he has not resigned and the vacancy has not commenced. Once the vacancy commences, you have 60 days to take your action. So what's before you tonight is effectively an information item, as Madam Mayor, you had requested. We provide you about the process. The vacancy has not commenced, and so there is no action for you to take. It is, yes, Councilmember Bowders, we did include the word direction on the chance that there was an action you could take, but the vacancy has not commenced yet. So tonight it is purely an information item. If, however, the vacancy commences before your July 6th meeting, staff would be inclined to bring forward an item for your consideration at that meeting to call the election if that's something the council would be interested in. Lots of words, happy to repeat any of it. I hope it wasn't too confusing.
Member Pats?
2 quick things. One, it will commence before, in talking to the city manager and the timelines, it will commence. And I apologize, I had assumed that you would be able to appoint my replacement, not have to bear the cost of an election, although I feel like an election is a better process. And with that, I'll go back on mute.
Thank you. Member Pats, are you comfortable clarifying that it will commence before July 6th should we decide to put an item on the future agenda addressing this issue?
Yeah, my intent had been to stay until I moved in August, but I will resign in June. I am working on the letter as we speak and will stay through the first 2 meetings in June and then resign. Or I will give my letter in soon this week, but it will be effective after the 2nd meeting in June.
Okay, thank you. That will be helpful in planning. At this time, colleagues, with your indulgence, I'd like to move to public comment on this item, and I'll ask the clerk if anyone has submitted electronic comments to read into the record.
No, I have received no comments at this time.
Thank you. And members who are joining us via Zoom, please use the raise hand feature to be recognized. If you're calling in, please press *9 to raise your hand. And I see there is one caller with a raised hand. Madam Clerk, please unmute the speaker. And speaker, you have 3 minutes.
Go ahead, please.
I've heard that in Emeryville, an election would, and I guess, I don't want to say the word will, but would cost over $100,000, up to 140 or something like that. And I understand that the city is kind of not in great shape financially right now, owing to the economic status that we're in, the dire straits. So is there I would like to hear some discussion on how to, is our back against the wall vis-a-vis this huge nut that we're going to have to present? Is there any relief that we can apply for or appeal to the state and somehow or whatever to not have to spend $130,000 to have an election? I would like to hear some discussion tonight, if possible, about that topic, about the huge amount of money looming that we're going to have to spend here. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
All right, seeing no other public commenters with their hands raised, we'll go ahead and close public comment. And speakers, so we don't know yet if the state is calling a general election for, ooh, a hummingbird just went by my window. If we don't know yet if the state is calling an election for the recall of governor. So if and when that happens, we'll have more information on whether we would be able to consolidate an election. The advice that we're getting from staff to this point is that we will need to go to election for the reasons explained by the city manager, that we cannot have a majority appointed council appoint a member and have another majority appointed council. So it does appear that that is the road that we are going down. So colleagues, it seems the path to me seems to be that we should be putting an item on our July 6th agenda to go ahead and consider calling an election. And again, I'll repeat what the city manager said, which is that if we don't call the election will happen anyway, but this will at least give staff the tools to plan for all of the things that will eventually happen. So I'll bring it back to the group to discuss. And Christine, did you want to interject?
Just to clarify that no action can be taken until the vacancy commences. So placing an item on the agenda is not an action. The action would be calling the election. So just to clarify, we don't have a vacancy that has actually commenced yet.
Thank you. I apologize if I misspoke.
No, I'm just offering that.
But it will. We presume from information we've been given earlier in this meeting that we will have a vacancy as of July 6th, and that will be the earliest meeting after that vacancy commences for us to take action. So there we have it. Does anyone have any thoughts? Are we okay with placing that item on the agenda for the 6th?
I don't know that we need to do so until we have a resignation letter, and this isn't our last opportunity to ask for a future agenda item.
I agree. I would not give it. It says I don't think this was agendized properly. I know, Madam Mayor, you were trying to share information. I don't think this is on you. I don't think this is appropriately agendized. It says discussion and direction. We do not have a resignation letter, and I don't believe we should be having this discussion. Lots of things could happen. He could change his mind. He could not leave for some reason. And so for us to have this as a premature discussion, I object to the conversation.
So what do you propose?
I propose that we receive the information that was provided and we move to the next agenda item.
And then propose another agenda item after we receive a letter of resignation?
The staff put agendas together on their own. If they receive a resignation letter at some point from Councilmember Pats, they can put this on an agenda for us to discuss and give us options like they do on other items. It doesn't require us to give them direction to do it.
Madam City Manager, does that work?
Sure. I mean, I don't know when we'll be receiving the letter. So if we receive the letter, you may be precluded from calling the election 114 days before November 2nd, but that's fine. We can operate without having any direction on that.
Scott, did you have your hand raised? Nope. All right. So be it. We will give staff the room to make the appropriate decisions. And we'll move on to our next item. If folks remember agenda trivia, we're back at 11.1, addressing the master fee schedule, which is going to, which naturally comes after item 12.1 with the ordinance that we just passed. So does staff have a presentation on the master fee schedule?
Again, that's Nancy Humphrey giving you an overview.
Welcome, Nancy Emeryville.
Hi. Yes, so Sherry, if you would bring up that one pager, the master fee schedule proposal. It's the same slide you saw with the fees earlier. And I went over this a little bit ago, but I think it speaks for itself, although I'm available to answer questions.
Are you seeing the slide now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can see the slide. Nancy, do you want to just go over how we developed our fees and costs and maybe explain why it looks different than our neighbors?
Yes. So we did a lot of staff time analysis for the dockless permits. And we came up with these same permit application, renewal, and issuance fee costs. When you think about how the systems operate, administratively, they're very similar. And so the assumption was that this would take the same amount of staff in time and input to administer. And then the meter costs, that is based on what Oakland and Berkeley do for meter area parking. They do an analysis of how many hours they believe each vehicle will be parked at a meter, given the curb length of metered parking in the city and the number of vehicles and the presumed use. So that was based on our neighbors' calculations. And then for designated space vehicle share, Berkeley does not have those. This cost is the same as Oakland has, and it is comparable. It has parity with the free-floating cars permit. So again, the administrative cost would be similar to permit and operator to make sure they have all of the required insurance and paperwork and so on.
All right, thank you, Nancy. Are there any clarifying questions for staff before we ask for public comment? No? So I'll check in with our city clerk to see if anyone has submitted electronic comment on this item.
No comments at this time.
All right, and I will check in with our attendees. A reminder, if you're attending on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature to be recognized. If you are calling in, please press *9, and I'll give it a second and see if any hands come up. And seeing none, I will go ahead and close the public comment period on this item. Colleagues, is there any discussion on the resolution, or would someone like to make a motion in a second? Member Medina?
I'll move the resolution.
And I'll go ahead and second it. We have a motion by Member Medina and a second by myself. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Councilmember Pats?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Donahue?
Aye.
And Mayor Martinez?
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. That brings us to department head reports, and I see none listed, so I'm going to assume, unless a department head pipes up right now, that we don't have any department head reports. That'll take us to future agenda items. I have a few, but I will offer the floor to anyone else first. Does anyone have any future agenda items? Member Donahue?
I would like to study some gun regulation ordinances that have been happening in California that could make our city a safer place. And I think we should consider them as a part of our city. I think it could potentially save some lives, and it would certainly, I think, create greater safety in our city.
And is this a referral to the Public Safety Committee, Vice Mayor Donahue?
We could do that, but we don't. There's a chance that it's not going to be able to be discussed for quite a while. So I would like to have it come back just to the council.
I'm sorry, I muted. City Manager Daniel, go ahead.
So, Madam Mayor, Assuming that Councilmember Pats does submit his resignation, you will lose the 2-member committee of public safety. And so depending on when that gets reconfigured, there is no committee to refer it to.
Just want to note that we lost member Medina, and I'm asking her if she's able to come in on her phone. So let's just, let's give her a moment. She's also rebooting her laptop. So I'm sorry, Christine, I was receiving and responding to those texts as you spoke. You mentioned that we will lose our quorum in that committee, and I didn't hear the last half of what you said.
Right, so depending upon when the council decides to reconfigure that committee, it may be some time before there is a public safety committee to refer it to. So if the council, the council has a choice in terms of this future scheduling item is to wait until that happens or to bring it back to the full council. Just acknowledging that potential outcome.
Right, and it is actually, it's paramount to me that we're able to keep that committee going. So that was going to be one of my future agenda items. So
we might solve that problem.
Yes. So Scott, how do you feel about addressing the fact that addressing our possible vacancies on council committees first, and then deciding where this item goes, and maybe erring towards it going towards committee and then coming towards council?
Okay, that would be fine with me. Yes, okay. I like that path.
Do you have any other items that you wanted to bring forward to the council?
No.
Okay, and are folks okay with discussing gun safety or referring that to our public safety committee, gun regulations? Okay, great. John, it's getting dark in your place.
I'm banking on you being done by 8:30.
Are there any other requests for future agenda items from members? So that was my first one, actually, was consideration of filling potential vacancies. And I hope council is okay with, using their discretion, with having staff use their discretion as to when to put that item on to coincide with when we have a letter of resignation, because that's definitely a committee that I don't want to see any gaps in if we can help it. But we should be looking at filling vacancies on our council committees and on regional bodies as well. Are folks okay with moving that forward? Not at a specific date, but after we have a resignation. Go ahead, John.
I was going to say, Madam Mayor, if we ultimately get to this place where we have a July 6th meeting and the staff put this on the agenda, or we have a letter in hand and we can do that, I like your suggestion. I would just say we have a suite of items at that time to replace and make sure we have representation at all our regional and local committees, so that even if it's till December, that's what we have in place.
Perfect. I agree. Member Pats, you had your hand raised?
It was covered there. I was going to say regional boards. That said, you do have, anyways, yes. I think that's a great plan.
Okay, very good. I also received a request today to consider a zero emission vehicle resolution. And I'd like to refer that to the Sustainability Committee if folks are amenable to that. It doesn't mean you have to recommend it, just would love sustainability to look at it. And I will forward that to staff. Thank you for supporting that. And then finally, at the request of the Mayor's Conference, I'd like to have a presentation from All Home on their regional action plan to address homelessness in the near term. So they have All Home is it's a group of elected officials, experts, people with lived experience, who've been coming up with a succinct plan to direct funds and create directives for the 9 Bay Area counties, I understand, on how to navigate all of our resources for homelessness and kind of herd a lot of cats. So I've appreciated their presentation. The mayor's conference is hoping that the individual city councils will endorse the action plan and hopefully see more coordination between federal, state, county funds and more coordination, frankly, in actions. So I hope we can bring this forward. I understand their staff is happy to entertain any city that's willing to hear this plan. So I'd like to make contact with them and bring them back. Great. All right. Thumbs up. Good. Okay. We'll hear about homelessness at a future meeting. All right. Any comments from council members or parting thoughts tonight before we take off? All right. Thank you, everyone. It's 8:25 and this meeting is adjourned. Good night.
Night.